Joining us now is junior senator from Virginia, Tim Kaine. Senator, great to have you with us.
Hey, John, great to be with you.
Senator, you're really in the catbird seat on the Senate side. You're on the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, the Budget Committee, everything going on right now with those three areas. Let's get to Armed Services. The Syrian situation now deteriorating further. President Obama's press conference on Tuesday, he's now trying to figure out what exactly the red line is.
Right.
John McCain, your colleague, is saying our credibility is at stake. Senator, what do you think the action in Syria should be from the U.S.?
John, here's my strong feeling, and it's interesting. We have Syria briefings both in Armed Services and Foreign Relations, and I have to ask myself which committee I'm in because so much of the topics we're dealing with are similar in both. On the ground, the challenge in Syria right now is that the effort to topple Assad, and we ought to be supporting that in every way we can, needs to shift from it needs to be seen as an effort to get rid of a corrupt dictator rather than a sectarian ethnic conflict. Assad is part of this minority of Syrians, the Alawite minority. It's about 15 to 20% of the population, but they make up about 70% of the military leadership in the country.
Right.
And what he is doing is he is telling the Alawites that this is a Rwanda situation. We have to hold on to power because if we lose it, there's going to be an ethnic purge of all Alawites. And so as long as the conflict is being portrayed that way, they're going to, the Alawites in Assad will fight to the death, and they'll use everything at their disposal, potentially even including chemical weapons. So I think the most important thing we can do right now is provide the kind of aid that we should, even lethal aid to the opposition. But the condition should be that the opposition needs to welcome Alawite leadership into the opposition. The more the opposition brings Alawite leaders into the opposition, the more it's just an effort to topple a corrupt dictator and not an ethnic sectarian battle. And second, the more Alawites we get into the opposition, the more we dilute the influence of the jihadist elements like al-Nusra, who are taking a strong hand in the opposition in ways that would worry all of us. So, the president has to make this decision about the evidence surrounding chemical weapons usage. I would support escalating our aid from non-lethal aid to lethal aid, providing that with other nations to the opposition. But I wouldn't do it unless the opposition is very serious about being diverse and inclusive and makes very plain that it is not an ethnic battle, but it is a battle to get rid of a corrupt dictator.
Right, so you would be acknowledging in that scenario that there is a percentage risk that the lethal weapons that we send to the rebels could simply end up in the wrong hands, or the final outcome as to who's in charge could not necessarily be to our liking, right?
Yeah, yes, there is that risk. But again, we can dilute that risk, dilute the influence of the jihadists if we can get the Alawite leadership into the opposition. So recently, Secretary Kerry was in Istanbul meeting with Alawite leaders and opposition leaders, trying to get them to be more inclusive.
Right.
I had a meeting last week on the Foreign Relations Committee. We met with King Abdullah of Jordan, who's trying to do the same thing. He's been Jordan has been very supportive of the opposition for obvious reasons. They have, nearly 1 million Syrian refugees have come over the border into Jordan with a small population about the size of Virginia. I mean, that is massive. And so he's aiding the opposition as well, but trying to get them to be more inclusive. And there was a prominent defection of a key Alawite military leader in the last week and a half, defection away from the military. We just need to make sure that opposition is broad-based and diverse. And if we do that, we will hasten Assad's departure peacefully and dilute the jihadist elements that we're worried about.
Now, Senator Kaine, one other potential action, again being forwarded by John McCain and South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, is that we institute a no-fly zone. Now, that comes with risks because that could cause casualties on the Russian side as they're trying to defend their interests, which could further escalate the issue. How do you stand on that?
Well, it's, what you would do is you would establish, I think the proposal is if you could establish with U.S. military support a no-fly zone in one of the border regions of the country, you would provide the opposition forces a place where they could use as a haven to grow in strength and be less subject to the military superiority that the Syrian armed forces now have. So there's some virtue to that. And I understand, Senator McCain and others are saying if we don't do that, we weaken our own credibility. The question that I have is, I don't think this just can be a U.S. Endeavor. It just can't be. The notion that it's the U.S.'s responsibility in any area where there is a conflict like this to go in and play the lead role, it's just, I don't think that's consistent with the current global realities or our current fiscal realities. For the U.S. to play a major leadership role in tandem with other nations, now that's another question. So decisions about things like no-fly zones, we ought to be talking with Arab League nations that are working to also usher Assad out. We ought to be talking to Turkey, which has a lot at stake in this, and European nations, especially those in NATO with us. If there is a decision by a broad coalition of nations that would make sense, I could see supporting the U.S.'s involvement in that. But the notion that the U.S. should just put U.S. military assets and people at risk to do this, look, next will be Mali, next will be, there's just so many instances of this around the world. We're just not in a place where the U.S. can be the nation that everybody just expects to do it all the time.
If I could shift over for a second, let's get to the sequester and kind of the air traffic controllers debacle. The air traffic controllers were able to come back because the people in charge were able to take the money they had to save and save it somewhere else.
Reallocate it.
Right. They got reallocated. So the average person like me looks at that and says, well, why can't we do that with the entire $85 billion?
Here would be, and to some degree we can, but I think what we ought to do is Congress ought to be doing it. That, there was a proposal, John, earlier, well, since Congress couldn't reach a budget deal and Congress couldn't find a path forward on sequester, then Congress came up, hey, we have a bright idea. Let's just keep the cuts in place, but Mr. President, you make them all, I mean, come on. I think that the problem has been that Congress has been unwilling to take responsibility and make decisions. And it is just a new non-decision tactic to say, okay, well, we'll keep all the same cuts in place, but Mr. President, you figure out how to make them all.
Right.
I do think it was a common sense solution with respect to the FAA because, as you know, air traffic is a pillar of the American economy, and what we need to do is we need to grow the economy more. That's going to be good for jobs, and it's also the best anti-deficit strategy. So something that starts to choke air traffic will actually weaken the economy, and we need to strengthen the economy. But I really believe, John, that there is now no substitute for Congress figuring out the way to find a deal. Blaming the president and saying, well, the president should figure out a better way to do these cuts. No, Congress should do its job. So we have a Senate budget passed, a House budget passed, a presidential budget on the table. We now need the two houses, sit down with our two budgets, which are very different, as you know, but find ways to split differences, find points of commonality, listen to each other, compromise. And it may be difficult in the short term. I supported an alternative to the sequester that got 53 votes in late February, but it wasn't enough to overcome the filibuster in the Senate. But we do have the ability to pass a 2014 budget to go into effect October 1 that would represent a true compromise between the two houses. And as you saw in Richmond this year with the transportation compromise, that's what a legislative body ought to be doing. And so, I continue to press on that. If we, figuring out new mechanisms where in absence of congressional compromise, we can give more tools to the executive to do stuff, it papers over the problem, which is the unwillingness of Congress to find compromise.
Whatever the compromise is, some people are going to be unhappy with it, but obviously, as you say, when you look at how the air traffic controllers was handled, for the average guy on the street, it's like, well, why can't we do that with everything, as you just said? Senator Kaine, final question. Immigration reform, the Senate Gang of Eight put out a proposal, 850 pages. I haven't read all 7 pounds of it. I did read a number of summaries on it. Although I actually could work out with it if I ever printed it off as weights. But my question is, a lot of conservatives are looking at this and they're saying, hey, this is just a blanket amnesty bill. Businesses that hired illegals, there's no penalty for them. Some people don't think that the border security is changing that much. What's Senator Kaine's view?
Well, first, I like this proposal, John, because it has been hard fought, hard negotiated in a bipartisan way, and not just a gang of eight that is 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, but the Chamber of Commerce has been at the table, labor unions have been at the table, activist groups that advocate for new Americans have been at the table, the agriculture industry, the technology industry, universities, companies that hire high-skilled workers. Everybody's been at the table on this, and we just aren't doing enough legislation like this where everybody's at the table trying to find a solution. So I'll start and say I like it that way. I don't believe it's an amnesty bill. Amnesty is, okay, hey, you're here without documents, all is forgiven, you're fine, you're in. That's not what this bill is. This bill establishes a 13-year process. If you were here without, not legally, without documents, you got to raise your hand, you got to pay taxes, you have to pay a stiff fine, you have to learn English, you have to demonstrate through periodic background checks that you're not engaging in criminal activity. And if you do that for 10 years, you can then get in line to get a green card that 3 years later could potentially allow you to become a United States citizen. This is not amnesty by any stretch of the imagination. So, I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, and I think we're going to be seeing over the course of the next month a lot of discussion about particular details because it is path to citizenship, it's visa reform, it's family reunification, it's better tools for employers to verify the immigration status of folks who apply to work with them and requirements that they do so. So we'll battle over all these details, but if we get a bill out onto the floor, and I think we will, that has significant bipartisan support, I predict that we will pass it out of the Senate with a big enough bipartisan margin that it will say to the House, we put party aside to do what was right for the country, and we're hoping you're going to do the same thing.
Okay, so as it stands now from what you've seen, what they've put on the table so far, Senator Kaine, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, as proposed now, you would be inclined to back it, right?
Yes. I can see some little glitches and things I would like to improve, certainly. But as proposed now, it would be my intention to support it.
Okay, Senator Kaine, we're out of time. We appreciate the time, and thanks for being with us today. That's Senator Tim Kaine, Jr. Senator from Virginia, Democrat here.